guys, you may have seen I've got some new moulds out and I wanted to show you this one, the female figure one. I know she looks a bit weird on the packet. And then you can buy it with the head, but the head comes in a separate box to the body. So if you've purchased it with the head, just make sure you've got both those boxes that I'm showing you here. It's fairly flexible is the silicone on these moulds because this is one of the trickier moulds to use. So out of all the ones I've done, I would say this is the hardest one to use because the body parts are really quite small on this one, guys. Now, we did have female head molds out before, so the one that goes with this one's a little bit smaller than the previous ones, and I'm going to use Serratina modelling paste as well, guys, for this. I've mixed a bit of the brown and the pale skin tone one together. I realise you can just about see that in the corner of the screen. And I'm going to just dust the moulds in corn flour just to stop the paste sticking. Now, I would advise using modelling paste for this, guys. Don't use fondant, or if you do use fondant, make sure you've got CMC or Tylose in it because it's a tricky mould to use. The parts are very small and anything very flexible is going to squash or stretch when you try and get it out the mould. So you want something firm that's going to set up a little bit in there. So I'll start with the head. And I'm putting 16 grams of paste into the head. So I've rolled it into a bit of an oval. Just make sure the front of the face is nice and smooth, or the front of the paste that you're putting into the front of the head is nice and smooth. We don't want to have any cracks. And then can you see I'm pushing it really firmly into the mould? So really push down where you think the nose area is and the chin and the mouth, because they're quite small details. So you will have to push in firmly to get those in. And I've left it rounded at the back. So if you don't want yours to be rounded, you can cut off any extra off the back. But it just gives me a nice shaped head if I've got that extra bit. So for the body, I'm going to add 9 grams of paste. Again, I'm not putting it to the exact shape of the mould, but if you can get it to a similar shape, it's going to fit in there a little bit better. Give it a really good press down. This one wants to be flat against the back of the mould, so not sticking out like the head. And I'm going to use 9.3 grams. I know it's very precise for that one. For each leg. Now this one you will have to roll into the rough shape of the leg to help you get it into the mould. So I started with the wider end, so just roll like a long sort of carrot shape and push that into the mould. And I've pushed sort of the foot bit in there last. And again, it wants to be pretty flat with the top of the mould. And you can see there's little slits in the top of my mould at the top of each leg. That's just to help you when removing the paste later. So for each of the arms, I'm going to use 1.4 grams in each arm. Now it's very small, is this, such a tiny amount of paste. So this is where you have to start being a little bit careful because things become fragile the smaller we go. So you're going to roll it nice and thin, nice thin sausage shape to get it into the mould. And if it helps, you can flex the mould open a little bit to push the paste in, but really give it a good push in there. Now, before you remove it, you want your paste to firm up a little bit, guys. Now, you can leave it at room temperature if your room's fairly cold. If not, put it in the fridge or freezer for 10 minutes. You don't want it to set so hard that it's going to crack, but firm enough that it's not really soft. And you can use either a wire or a cocktail stick to remove the body parts or to help you remove the body parts. The big kebab skewers are probably just a little bit wide. You'll notice when you do pull it out, there's a bit of a seam across the back. So just smooth that down either with your finger or a modelling tool. And you don't have to keep a stick in there. It just helped me remove it from the mould. And we can play around with the positioning of the body so she doesn't have to stay as rigid looking. You can bend her back, give her a bit more of an arch at the bottom of her back. You can even put a little line in, a little indentation in slightly where the spine is. But don't press too hard, just nice and gentle. If she's wearing clothes, you don't need to bother with that bit. So for the head, I'm putting in a kebab skewer. I'm putting it fairly deep in the head and then I'm pulling it out. You want to avoid pressing the front of the face because you're going to squash the features if you press the front of the face. If you want to make her look a little bit happier, you can press in a little bit further with a modelling tool at each side of her mouth, kind of going in and upwards a little bit. Or you can leave her as she is. That's absolutely fine to do that as well. So again, removing any seams. If she's got hair on, you can leave that seam. The hair will cover it. And again, can you see the slits in the end of the mould? That's where I would push a wire into the leg. Now, a wire is probably going to be better for the legs because it's a little bit thinner and it's just going to help me pop it out of the mould. If your paste is firm enough, you can pull it out of the mould without the wire. And again, there will be a little seam just on the top. You can either rub it with your finger or a modelling tool, or if you prefer, you could even just with a craft knife, just take off that tiny bit of the seam. And this bit here is the rounded bum. So the flat bit is actually the front of her leg. So just try and round it off a little bit if you can with your fingers. Or that should become more rounded when you rub off that seam. And depending on what positioning you put her in will depend on if you want to sort of curl up the toes or bend it at the knee. So this is why it's important that your paste hasn't fully set, because if you do want to move around these body parts like this, you don't want them to have fully set. So I think this first one can be sat down. A seated position is easier with this mold, so you can do standing, but seated is going to give you a firmer position, especially if you're doing a cake that's going to be traveling somewhere. If it's going to be sat on something that's moving around, it's just going to make it that bit sturdier. Now again, the arms are very small, quite fragile, so just be careful with these. If you've got hot hands, guys, use a paste that you know works well for you, that doesn't melt too easily in your hands, or you might even consider wearing food grade gloves so that the heat from your hands isn't melting your arms, because they are very small and delicate, these arms. And I rolled it slightly on the work surface to just get rid of that seam, or you can cut it off with a craft knife again. Now the face doesn't have ears on, just like the other molds, there's no ears attached, so if you want to add ears, just put a small ball of paste on each side of the head. Just make sure you've picked up the same colour paste that you used for your skin. Once it's pressed on firmly, just press a little tool in there. Anything that's a bit rounded, I use this rubber-ended tool just to create a little bit of a dip in the middle of the ear. And if you use a big, round, fluffy brush, we can then add a bit of blusher. So I'm going to use my Petal Craft Dusts. You can use any of the loose edible powders. I'm just putting a little bit of pink, mainly on the cheeks, and then just a tiny bit on the nose and forehead. And if you want the lips to have a bit of colour but to be quite subtle, keep to a dry powder. You can even put this on the joints like the knees, the elbows, a little bit on the chest. And then I think this one's going to have closed eyes, so I'm just going to give her some eyeshadow using the powders. And I'm colouring in her lips using the edible pens. So I'm going to use a mix of the purple and the red one together on this. You can paint them on with food colouring or edible dusts. And then I'm using a black pen to just draw a line under each eye. And that's going to be her eyelashes for her closed eyes. And then I'm just going to draw on the eyebrows as well. So if you want to give your female figure an outfit, it's up to you whether you want to put clothing on her as you go along, so before you start building all the body parts together, or if you want to fully clothe her afterwards. And again, that's going to depend on what kind of outfit you're going to give her, as to whether it's easier to dress her in advance of putting the body parts together or afterwards. So I'm going to sit this one so she's sitting over the edge. Now I'm just going to build her on a polystyrene dummy. You can build her on a cake. I would advise maybe doing it on polystyrene and letting her fully set for a few days first before taking her off the polystyrene and then putting her onto a cake or whatever it is you want to stick her onto. So this one's going to be a bride, I think. So I've just wrapped a piece of fabric around her legs. So I'm going to have it so that the legs are still on show. Now, I'm not showing you too much about the outfit on this one, guys, but don't forget I do have a wedding couples class online, and you get more ideas for outfits and dresses and men's suits and things on there. But we can just see her legs poking out there. Now, sticking the body parts together, you want to use a bit of water or edible glue, and you're going to push these firmly together. And think about what position you want to put her in. If you want to look into one side, you might want to twist the body a little bit. I'm going to use a wooden kebab skewer now, guys, to push down through her neck. Now, the neck is quite narrow, and this is quite a thick wooden kebab skewer, so I'm going gently with this, twisting gently a little bit at a time. And that's just going to secure her onto the polystyrene dummy. And it's also going to add some internal support to the body as well. If you struggle with something so wide, swap to something thinner like a florist wire. So I'm going to trim this, but I need enough stick at the top that's coming out that my head will sit on. So if I make that too short, the head will not stay on. The head will just drop off. So just make sure that stick goes in here, and it will go through the majority of a head, but I haven't got it coming out of the top of a head on this one. Just make sure that you push the head on so that the chin is quite forward from the neck. Otherwise, the head looks like it doesn't fit right. Now, with the mould, the fingers are all joined together. So if you want to separate them, just put a little cut where you can see each of the fingers. If you like them all together, you can leave them. You don't have to cut them and separate them down. They are very small, so they're quite fiddly. So I would advise having a bit of a play around with these first and then deciding which you like best. And I'm just going to push these onto her shoulders using a little bit of water. Again, you can use edible glue if you find that easier. Just make sure those arms haven't set too much when you're putting them on. So there she is. And of course you can play around then with adding more to her outfit or her hair. Now, if you don't want to use the leg part, guys, I'm going to show you what a bride looks like if I use a polystyrene cone inside instead of her actual legs. So if her legs aren't going to be on show, you don't necessarily have to make the legs, and it's going to be sturdier this way. So you're going to make the other body pieces just as we did before. And I'm just going to make sure the top of my polystyrene cone, which I have cut the point off of, I maybe cut a little bit too much off the top. Just make sure it's thin enough that the body sits nicely onto it. You don't want the top of the cone to be much wider than her hips on the body part. So that's going to go on there like so. So you're then just going to push the body down like we just did on the previous one with that wooden kebab skewer going right through. And I'm going to push that right down until it reaches the bottom of that piece of polystyrene. And once it's on there, just press the bottom of the body onto the polystyrene nice and securely. And again, I'm going to cut that skewer so that I've got enough that will just go inside the head. Can you see it will go through the majority of the head but not quite poke out the top? And then you just push the head on like so. Now, of course, it is better if you have done the face first on the head. On this one, I've just stuck it on so you guys can see how I've put it together. And I'm just, with my paintbrush handle, rolling the paste from her neck onto the underneath of her neck. So on this one, I'm going to give her open eyes. Now, like I say, if you do this before you stick it on, it's far, far easier, guys. But I'm just pressing in where the eye sockets are, or where the eye marks are to create eye sockets, and I'm just going to fill them with white modelling paste. And you will have seen me do this before on my other mould videos, so if you want more ideas for how to do the face on this one, do check out my face mould videos that I already have. It's a slightly bigger mould, but you can still use it in exactly the same way as I have done with this one. So if you want eyelids, you can make part of the white of the eye into an eyelid. That will narrow the eyes a little bit smaller as well. You can use powders or you can use the edible pens. Quite often for ease, I will use the edible pens. It's a little bit quicker for me. So I'm just using the pens for the lips as well to give her a bit of lipstick. We'll draw a black line across the top of the eye so that it looks like eyelashes. I'm using the black edible pen for that. Let's give her some blusher. So this one with the open eyes is just the eyes that are done differently to the last one that I've just showed you. I'm going to draw the eyes themselves, so the pupils, in with the pen, an edible pen. So now that her body, head and skirt area, polystyrene are together, I'm going to just ice it so it looks like a wedding dress again. You could ice it to look like a ball gown, whatever dress you wanted really. Now I'm not going to show you too much of this bit, guys. As mentioned earlier, I do have a wedding couples class, and on there I show you how I make wedding dresses. So, you know, if you want to see a little bit more, have a little look over on that one. And of course you can dress them however you fancy. I'd love to see what ideas you guys come up with for it. So once she's dressed, and you'll notice the arms aren't on, the arms are going to go on next. Now this one was easier to do without the arms. Sometimes the arms can get in the way when you're trying to put them clothes on. Just as we did with the seated figure, you can then attach the arms with some water or edible glue and have a little bit of a play around with the positioning. Ta-da! She will need ears adding, of course, like the last one as well. Now the other thing you can do is a standing figure, guys. So I let these ones firm up a little bit, and I've added a wire through the legs, and can you see it sticks out the bottom as well? Now I haven't stuck it very far at the bottom, but you can push it much further through. But only one wire wants to be long enough at the top that goes through the body. So I'm going to push this onto my polystyrene. Now this is where it gets trickier, guys. So you're going to have to be a little bit more patient. You're going to have to let body parts set a little bit longer. So for this one, I've stuck the two legs together at the top with a bit of water. So between sort of those bum cheeks, they are squeezed together, and the wire sticking out of that foot goes into the polystyrene. Now you might find while it's first going on there, it's a little bit soft. You want to wedge underneath. If you've got her on her tiptoes, you might have her completely flat-footed, in which case you wouldn't need this wedge. And then I'm going to push a hole through the body first. And can you see at the back of the body, I've pulled the back out at the bottom just a little bit, so she's got a bit of a curve. And I'm going to push her down onto these wires. So if the second wire is getting in the way, just cut it down a little bit more or push it deeper into the polystyrene. And of course, you guys can completely play around with these positions. And then you're going to push this down, pressing the edge of the body onto the tops of the legs, and you can put water or edible glue between the body and legs. Now, don't worry too much about the seam if you know she's going to be wearing clothes. And I tried to make the seam fall under where a bikini or your underwear would go, so that if you did just want to put like pants on or knickers, that would be easy to cover that seam up. So I'm not worried too much on this particular one about blending out any seams. And the arms are going to go on like so. So the body parts are all together just as we did before. It's just that the legs will need longer to firm up. And make sure everything has firmed before you add the head. So I've pressed her head onto that wire that was sticking out the top of her neck. Now this one, guys, I'm actually going to turn into an elf. And I realize I don't show you all how to do it on here, but I'm thinking maybe something for a possible future tutorial. But just changing the ear completely changes what she looks like as well. So she's going to set, maybe get some clothes on, and have a look at the other molds in my collection, guys. So like I say, I've got the baby one, the child one, some male faces. All of these ones are a little bit easier to use. The female one is the trickier one. So if you're not used to using molds, maybe start with the baby or the child one and then move on to the female figure one. But she's going to need a little bit of drying time, unlike the others. I hope you enjoy the mold, guys. I'd love to see what you create from it. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and leave me a comment below. You can see more of my tutorials by clicking on the images on screen now. If you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button to stay up to date with my future tutorials. There are also links in the description box below where you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and more.